Good morning. We're going to get going.
Cool for LA.
Good morning. I'm David Theo Goldberg. I direct the University of California Humanities Research Institute and the DML Research Hub, the hosts of the 6th Annual Digital Media and Learning Conference. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to sunny Southern California, though you wouldn't know it. We're working on the weather as we're working on the hotel as well. It's a pleasure to have you all here. It's a dynamic few days. I want to begin just by thanking, before I make some introductions, I want to begin by thanking a range of people. This would not be possible without the support of the MacArthur Foundation, Julia Stash, the president, and Connie Yao, the present and outgoing director of education, Jen Humke, who's in the education initiative, who have over the past decade sponsored the Digital Media and Learning Initiative and made our collective work possible. So I want to mark this just by giving them an enormous thank you. Please join me in conveying that. Both Julia Stash and Connie Yao will be here, Julia virtually and Connie personally present tomorrow at 12:30, where there will be a session that we added very late to the program with a couple of announcements about the future of the initiative as MacArthur sees it. So please join us tomorrow at 12:30. There will be no other sessions running concurrently. We're going into the lunchtime tomorrow, Friday. The theme this year is equity by design, in a sense, learning equity by design. The issue of inequality is on everybody's minds at the moment. Inequality, of course, is produced increasingly by design. Design is the way in which infrastructure, platforms, programs, projects are ordered. And they're ordered in many ways, and often, sometimes just by implication, but increasingly by design, inequities are produced as a consequence. The Digital Media and Learning Conference is conceived in order to address considerations around learning that draw on design in a way that we hope would be able to produce much more equitable outcomes in relation to learning possibilities for all involved. The conference will reframe the debate over equity and educational technology, examine issues of equity nationally and globally. It will give special consideration to marginalized communities in relation to learning and equity and design. It showcases the most current research regarding these considerations. We hope to be engaging you in discussions that promote equity and address, of course, inequity. And it promotes the use of digital media in productive and empowering ways. So we hope this is a very productive set of days from which you will take a number of considerations for your ongoing and future work. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Gutierrez, who's the DML2015 conference chair. She's a professor of language, literacy and culture at the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley. She's a national leader in education, having received numerous awards. Her research examines learning and designed learning environments with attention to students from non-dominant communities and English learners, and she has been published widely. She was appointed by President Obama as a member of the National Board for the Institute of Education Sciences, where she served as the vice chair. She will introduce our terrific keynote panel. Please join me in welcoming Chris Gutierrez. Thank you very much.
Bienvenidos a Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a really fitting city for this year's theme, Equity by Design, and I was so pleased that all the powers that be were excited about the theme and the possibilities of thinking about equity by design. At Los Angeles, as you know, is a place of super diversity. It's often characterized in that way, but super diversity also brings challenges like super poverty and super inequity. So I think it's a really fitting context for us to really rethink our work, to reframe it, and to collectively develop a new social and pedagogical imagination about what's possible with youth from non-dominant communities, both locally and globally. So I'm very excited about the next 3 days. I would like to thank the conference committee. I was so lucky to get so many wonderful, wonderful leading figures, scholars, and friends to be part of this. Ernest Morel, if you're here, just stand up. Ernest Morel, who's curating one of the themes. My pal, longtime partner in crime, Ernest. And Glinda Hull. Glinda Hull may be getting ready for her wonderful panel. Glinda Hull, my colleague at UC Berkeley. Audrey Waters. And Sam Dyson. Ooh, what a team, what a team. So those strands, they have helped curate in beautiful, thoughtful, provocative ways. Thank you again to David Thiel Goldberg for his wonderful direction in this, to our ever fearless leader, brilliant scholar, who's always a wonderful collaborator, Mimi Ito. Where are you, Mimi? Director of our Connected Learning Research Network as well. And this could not be possible with Claudia Caro Sullivan, who makes everything right now possible. Claudia, where are you? Thank you, thank you, thank you. A real quick shout out to some junior scholars and doctoral students who helped us. Dero Garcia, Daniela De Giacomo, Nicole Mira, Jose Lizarriga, Kyle Booten, Jason Sellers, and John Scott. Thank you so much for all your help in helping us put together a wonderful, wonderful session. So I don't want to take too much more time. I hope you look at the program carefully. My job now is to introduce my colleague from the Connected Learning Research Network, Craig Watkins. Craig's going to moderate this and he'll introduce the panel. Craig is professor at the University of Texas at Austin. He teaches in radio, television, film, sociology, and is also a member of the African American Studies Department and a faculty fellow for the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. His book, if you haven't read it, The Young and the Digital, what the migration to social network sites, games, and anytime, anywhere media means for our futures. And what's so wonderful about Craig's work is he intersects so many different communities. His interest in equity, his knowledge about communication in new media is found in so many communities, African American, Latino, scholarly, grassroots, public kinds of spaces. And he brings to it such a wonderful sensibility, an interdisciplinary sensibility about how to always put equity at the front of our work. And it's been a pleasure working and learning with Craig. So with that, let me turn this over to you, Craig, so you can introduce our fabulous panel. Thank you.
Mic check. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you, Chris, for that very generous introduction. And I want to say thank you to all of the people that you just thanked, but we're glad to be here. And thank all of you for being here and kind of getting through the construction, the elevators, and we're really looking forward to this opportunity to have a really stimulating conversation with Maria Teresa and Van Jones. I won't get into very lengthy backgrounds and introductions, but I will say just a few things about each of our panelists here today. So many of you may know Maria Teresa Kumar is the CEO and president of Voto Latino. In just over 10 years, this organization has arguably emerged as the premier platform in terms of political empowerment for young Latino millennials, the fastest growing segment in the United States. So they are poised not only to have impact today, but as we look at the young population in this country, particularly 18 years old and younger, poised to have long-term impact. And we see that as really important work and speaks quite importantly to the work that we do here at DML. Voto Latino has registered over 250,000 new voters and is emerging as a force in national politics as issues related to immigration reform, education, and healthcare continue to resonate throughout our political discourse today. Fast Company called Maria Teresa one of the top 100 creative minds for her work at Voto Latino, using technology, celebrity voices, media, and youth themselves to empower a generation of young voters. She was also named by Elle as one of the 10 most influential women in Washington, D.C., and is currently host of Changing America with MSNBC, where she's also been nominated for an Emmy for some of her contributing work with that network. Maria Teresa Kumar, thank you.
That was incredibly generous, thank you.
We also have Van Jones, who as well likely needs no introduction, but I'll do a little bit. Most of you probably know Van for the work that he's likely most visible for today, and that is the work that he's doing with CNN, and the contributing work that he's doing there, covering a broad range of issues, certainly given the news today in terms of issues that we're having with law enforcement, race, and equality. Van has emerged, I think, as a very critical and important voice in terms of helping sort of redirect a new kind of conversation as we move forward in this country. But what many of you may not know is that Van has a 25-year sort of history of sort of frontline work prior to his visibility on CNN. As probably one of the activists in this country and arguably in the world who's been engaged with some of the most urgent issues of our time. And we're going to talk about some of those issues today. Prison reform, education, technology, and opportunity. After graduating from Yale Law School in the early 1990s, Van moved to Oakland, where he helped found and sort of lead the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. And through that effort, Van and many of his colleagues took an important stance, and I would argue a historic stance, against state officials and a funding initiative that was prepared to build, at the time, what was called a super jail for young people. And the sort of pushback was certainly we could do better towards our young people in terms of the future that we imagine for them. And Van has been a critical voice on that front for many years and certainly is one today. After that work, Van became, I think, a true visionary in terms of green collar jobs and thinking forwardly about the green economy. And became a sort of central figure in the passage of the 2007 Green Jobs Act, which was signed by President George W. Bush. And you like to say that he signed the act, but he didn't put any money behind it.
That's true.
As you know, some of you like to know, he spent a little bit of time in the Obama administration working on sort of the green economy and green initiative. But since then, Van has gone on to do and continue to do important work. We're going to talk a bit today about his organization, Rebuild the Dream, and a number of the initiatives that they've launched, including Yes We Code, which in many ways sort of intersects with a lot of the interesting themes here at DML. Time Magazine has named Van one of the most influential people in the world, and Fast Company has named Van as one of the 12 most creative minds on Earth. So.
Damn it!
You're getting there. So obviously, right, these two outstanding visionaries, leaders, movers speak very powerfully, and I think very importantly to the work that we do here at DML. And if you think about the theme of this conference, Equity by Design, so much of their work certainly is aligned with that initiative. So let's just get into it. And I think what we decided we were going to do is just kind of have a conversation and then at some point kind of open it up to the audience to allow for participation. And I thought maybe where we might start is DML from the very beginning has always sort of challenged our community to think about the sort of new kinds of civic and political futures, particularly as it relates to young people and millennials, right? And how do we enlist their energy, their effort, their imagination to become the agents of change that we all know that they can be? You both are, in terms of your organizations and the work that you've been doing, sort of squarely kind of positioned to sort of speak to that. You're sort of mobilizing resources to sort of catalyze young people. We're sort of, it's 18 months out, but we're already sort of unofficially, officially in the presidential election season, November 2016. and things have certainly started already. There are going to be a number of important issues that emerge, issues that I think will be at least part of the conversations that will take place here over the next 3 days. And one of them certainly, right, is the issue of immigration reform. And more specifically, how do we think about the future of young activists, the kind of work that young activists are doing? And what I thought what we might do before we start this conversation is we have a quick video that we wanted to queue up with Astrid Silva, who has become one of the faces, if you will, of an emerging population in this country known as the Dreamers, right? Young, undocumented Latinos who are coming out of the shadows and who are beginning...
Well, not just Latinos, just undocumented.
Right, are coming out of the shadows and beginning to have their voices heard. This is a quick clip with President Obama back in December making his executive decision on immigration reform, and sort of Astrid talking about that. And we show this because 2 years ago we had Astrid on the stage at DML sort of talking about her work and the work of others like her and kind of their investment in trying to create better futures for young people from all walks of life. So can we see that clip, please?
Tonight,
So maybe you both could talk a little bit about where you think we are with immigration reform, and maybe not necessarily from the point of view of Washington, D.C., but from the point of view of young people sort of actively on the front lines, really trying to make their voices heard and really pushing for change. And how do you anticipate moving forward, particularly towards 2016, how this issue will play here nationally?
I think that, first of all, thank you so much for having us. I think that this is an important and timely conversation, not only because it's on the heels of 2016, but I would argue that this is one of the most important civil rights issues of our time. We're talking about 11 million people living within our borders that don't have a voice, that are scared to even call the authorities in the event that they get robbed, they get beaten up, because the authorities then turn around and basically take them away. Completely true story. The New Yorker, 2 weeks ago, basically in their issue, did something that wrote a piece that was, I think, epitomizes the helplessness that undocumented communities feel. It was a story profiling about a father who was undocumented, and he was working and got a call saying that they had their child was kidnapped. and they were calling for a ransom. This is in Newark, New Jersey. And the reporter went on to profile that this is actually a problem because what happens is that the children get crossed over the border. The communities know that they're completely defenseless. They know they don't call the cops. So they go and they pay for the ransom. And then it happens again. In the events where the parents have called the authorities, they get deported. This is happening right now within our borders. And this was an article that was written less than a month and a half ago. The fact that we don't highlight this and elevate it as an urgency of now, it tells us that we are, one, allowing injustices to happen within our borders, but at the same time, we are accomplices in this very intrinsic web of worker relationships. And what I mean by that is that every time you go to the grocery store, you eat your food, and I don't have to tell California, you eat your food, you go to the laundry, mat, you get your nails done, what have you, you more than likely know that you're interacting with someone that's undocumented, getting paid poorly, being abused, yet you continue to go on about your business and employing them. And until we have a moral check of why that's fundamentally wrong and actually start making demands in Washington, it's going to be business as usual. And that's basically what's happening right now in Washington. Washington does not fear the undocumented immigrant. They will do things to pacify the undocumented immigrant, but they definitely are not fearful of them. I know that, Van, you're doing incredible work right now with the prison industry, and oftentimes what happens is that we're talking a lot about the prison reform system. If you look at the jump in the prison reform system, and the first one, the big jump that we first received was in the 1990s, and that was because of basically penalizing low drug crimes. And that targeted specifically the African American community. You see a second jump in the justice system of the population of prisoners. That second jump happened around 2005, 2006. That correlates with the privatization, commercialization of private industries of detention centers. It was also fast forward to 2009, where it was the very first time that Latinos surpassed the prison population in the United States. So we have come into a business of basically incarcerating drug addicts that need help and rehabilitation, the mentally ill, and workers. And it's all under the guise that we're either protecting our communities, or we are also incarcerating these individuals. And this is where it gets really outrageous. So you have this private prison industry that's basically detaining these undocumented workers, simultaneously forcing them to do volunteer labor because they can't pay for their meals or get their phone cards that they need in order to call their homes. And they're basically paying them $1 to $3 a day. There was an incredible expose that was done 6 months ago by the New York Times, and there was no outrage. It was just like, oh, that's too bad. It's not too bad. It's a matter of how do we actually make change. I forecast that in the next year, in 2016, what we're going to see is that what's happening right now in the federal level, where the judges basically just put a stay on the Obama's immigration expansion for providing temporary relief. This is temporary relief to undocumented parents and their children. Something's going to come out, whether it's good or not. It's going to be an opportunity to catalyze not just the Latino community or the immigrant community, but it should be an opportunity to catalyze Americans to say the buck stops here. And we need to have an honest conversation with ourselves because we are under the illusion that immigration is a nice to have. No, our economy actually needs this labor, both the high-skill labor and the low-skill labor, in order to thrive and continue and to continuously reimagine ourselves. And I think that's what really DML is really about, is like how do we imagine our communities, our country, so we can continue to thrive. The only way to do so is to make sure that we're trying to figure out immigration reform at the forefront.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I massive, almost worshipful fan of you and your work. And in part because it's
Thank you.
The future in every level is really represented by what Voto Latino is doing, not just demographically, but technologically, politically, et cetera. So if you really want to understand the future of how you make a country better, this is the organization to study. We have studied it.
Thank you, Angela.
So I want to chime in a little bit on some of the challenges, so when we get to all the cool solutions, everybody feels a lot better.
Right. I was like, you started really heavy, guys.
Exactly. I know. So we want we wouldn't take you this far down if we didn't have actually really good solutions to take you back up. But let me further depress you.
Walk with us.
Exactly. Just by putting alongside that narrative, the narrative of what's going on in the African American community. I was in Ferguson for CNN. Got a chance to see that up close. My only advice to any of you is, no matter how much you want to be able to tell these stories, try not to get tear gassed on national television. That would be my only, because it stays on YouTube and your friends make fun of you. So, and breathing and being able to see are two good things, which I did not appreciate as much. You know, we have a seamless web of violence, unfortunately, that our government seems to be directing at poor communities of color. Inside the U.S. border, that mainly is symbolized by mass incarceration. At the U.S. border, that's mainly symbolized by deportation and detention. Beyond the U.S. border, it's mainly symbolized by militarization of our differences and conflict with folks in the Persian, Arab, and Muslim worlds. But it's a seamless web of violence. The same story. Poor brown folks getting hit with a lot of violence from forces that we pay for as taxpayers. And so I think that there's a need for us to see it more comprehensively, because when you put it all together, it's a real indictment on the idea of liberty and justice for all, which is what we're all signed up for, at least since third grade. So let me give you some bad numbers, and let me tell you what I think can be done. You know, people know this, but I don't think it's ever bad to say it. We're only 5%, the United States, only 5% of the world's population. So we're a little country, big geographically, but little in terms of numbers. We're only 5% of the world's population. But we have 25% of the world's prisoners. I'll say it again. We have 25% of the world's prisoners, which means on planet Earth, if you're a Martian and you're looking at planet Earth, 1 out of every 4 people locked up anywhere, chained up anywhere, are chained up here. Disproportionately African American, disproportionately Latino, disproportionately Native American, overwhelmingly poor. And the majority of those people are locked up for, at least initially, on their rap sheet, is nonviolent drug offenders. That's what they're locked up for, nonviolent drug offenders. Well, I don't mean to call anybody out. We got some nonviolent drug offenders in here. Don't raise your hand. You know, I went to Yale Law School.
That was too much laughter.
Exactly. I went to Yale for law school. About 80% of the student body were nonviolent drug offenders, and half the faculty. So, but the New Haven cops never came on campus and kicked in the door at Skull and Bones and drug all those cokeheads out. They drove past the campus 6 blocks of the housing project and put the same age kids within eyesight of each other, doing fewer drugs because they're poor, drugs cost money, in prison. So rich kids doing drugs got rehab, if that. Poor kids doing the same drugs, less of it, got 15, 16, 20-year sentences. You can get 30-year prison sentence in the United States under federal law for a nonviolent drug offense. You get 25 years for shooting a cop. So that gives you a sense of where we are. We're now trafficking in human bodies again. It's an incarceration industry. We lock up more African Americans now behind bars than we had African Americans enslaved in 1850. We lock up in the United States more black people by number and percentage now today sitting here than were locked up under apartheid South Africa when Nelson Mandela was in jail. More by number and by percentage. So when you look at that and you say, well, what's going on? There's an incarceration industry now. Wackenhut, Correctional Corporation of America, they're traded on the stock exchange. Their stock goes up, the more contracts they get, it's heads and beds. You're just processing bodies. So of course you're going to have longer prison sentences because you got an industry that profits from that. And to your point, here in California, we stopped them from privatizing the prisons, but we've got massive private for-profit deportation centers, from tip to start here in California. So that's the bad part. Good part is, stuff this bad, it starts to stink up the place. And even people who aren't directly affected just don't like it. And you're starting to see now the beginnings of a movement to return the country to some sanity. I'm part of a campaign called Cut 50, which is a campaign to cut the prison population in half. Just conspiring with her in the hallway to expand that out to include a lot more people than just the African American community. Because we pretend that we have diversity in the United States. We don't. We got bubbles that touch.
Yep.
We have bubbles that touch. That's not diversity. Diversity when we really take each other's hearts and concerns on as our own. Then that's when the stew's starting to cook. And we're not there yet, even among communities of color. So there's a pathway forward. Even the Republicans, and it's a nonpartisan gathering, I'm not a Republican, but even the Republicans are starting to express real concern about this level of mass incarceration. You have fiscally conservative Republicans who just don't want to raise taxes to pay for more prisons that don't work. You've got libertarians who are starting to say, this is gobbling up a lot of liberty, and I'm concerned. And you have Christian evangelical conservatives who say, if every soul matters to God, how can you put a 19-year-old in prison for doing something the kid across town's doing, and then when the kid gets out at 23 or 25, label him a felon, right. And then they could never get a job, they could never vote. Our view is that we've brought back in two of the worst racial crimes in the country through the prison door. Slavery inside the prison, which you just described, working for subsistence or less. That everybody works in prison, and you're forced to. That looks like slavery to me. Then you get out, you're still in economic prison, Jim Crow segregation. Can't vote, can't get a student loan, can't get a job, can't get an apartment. And you can never get out of it. So all that sucks. And we want to do stuff about it. And she's got an organization, I got one, and we got ideas.
Yeah, and this sort of speaks directly to an issue I think that is really at the heart of DML, and that is certainly this issue of education and opportunity. And what you both described, right, is this dilemma that not dilemma, but crisis, sort of tragic crisis of this sort of what we call school to prison pipeline. And so I think for us here, this becomes an urgent issue, right, in terms of just the sort of ramifications politically, educationally, economically. So as we work to build better, economic futures through alternative and more creative design educational pathways, this school to prison pipeline is something that we really have to begin to start thinking, critically about, because it's important work. Something else that's really kind of driving the pulse of DML is certainly this issue of technology, equity, and opportunity. Could you show the graphic that we have? And this is just, and you both are familiar with this, but around this time last year, Google released this piece of data on their workforce. And what you see here, right, is a workforce that's decisively, particularly in terms of the tech and leadership positions, a workforce that's decisively male, and a workforce that is decisively white and to some degree Asian. What stands out, right, obviously, right, is the woeful number of African Americans and Latinos represented in these companies and in these positions. Facebook, Yahoo, and others followed suit in terms of releasing similar stats as well. Now, this kind of confirmed what we all feared and kind of suspected, that there is this kind of growing kind of divide in terms of opportunity in what many of us might describe as a kind of technology-driven, kind of knowledge-driven kind of economy. And this is something that you both have sort of turned your attention to, right, in different kinds of ways, through Voto Latino, the Innovators Challenge that you launched, and we'd love to hear you talk more about that. And Van, the work that you're doing with Yes We Code. And would love for you to tell at least part of the story about that, how that came about via a conversation between you and that great political guru, Prince. So Maria, maybe talk a little bit about the Innovators Challenge, kind of what inspired that, what happened, your partnership with Google, and what you imagine that being in terms of having some impact on these kinds of numbers that we saw released last year.
Sure, and I think something to keep in mind is that those numbers include the individuals that are working in the cafeteria and the custodial workers and security guards. So the folks that are actually making the decisions and crafting ideas and stuff were really not at the table. They were stretching when they decided to include the custodial workers at most. And I think that this is, to me, what's most disheartening. I'm from Northern California. That's where I grew up, and specifically Sonoma. I went to UC Davis. I have always loved the North Bay. It's where I call home. And every time I go back home, I am saddened but embarrassed by how many of my family and the individuals that I care about are getting drastically behind in the hub of the world's Renaissance epicenter. And it's increasingly so segregated and so out of reach that you can drive, and I'm sure most of you have, and if you haven't, I encourage you, you can drive from one side, from Stanford University, and continue down University Avenue, and all of a sudden end up at East Palo Alto, and you have some of the highest crime rates, highest teenage pregnancy rates, highest gang rates, I mean, everything that you could possibly fathom. Literally, at the back, in the backyard is the epicenter of the billionaires of the world. So what's happening? I think you're right, where our bubbles are touching, but there's no urgency of now, and there's no reason to imagine differently. I take very much issue with individuals when they say that Silicon Valley is all meritocracy. I said, meritocracy if you went to the right schools or you know the right people, and all of a sudden you can think the same, and that you allow that. And I think that what we need to figure out is how do we provide young people not only the entryway into Silicon Valley, but also have Silicon Valley look into themselves and say we actually have to provide a culture that actually is conducive to bringing leadership all the way through. And that's really what's one of the reasons that sparked both the Latino Innovators Challenge. I had a conversation with Connie Yao and David. I said, you know what would be really interesting is that it's Voto Latino's 10-year anniversary. We started off as a startup. I basically financed the organization on my credit card. Never do that, terrible idea. And I had a modest Rolodex. How can we actually leapfrog that and allow young people to solve for the problems that they see at the front lines? Because for as much as I love Uber, it's not really solving the world's problems, right? Or paying taxes, okay, or paying taxes. But it's not, but if you allow folks that are having life experiences and saying, you know what, we're going to give you the opportunity to think big, because I think that's really important, is giving people that space that they actually can think big. We're going to give you some funding, we're going to give you the Rolodex, and we're going to give you the training. Then all of a sudden, I think you come up with some great ideas. And through the DML challenge, we had over 365 folks apply. And we basically identified the winners by bringing in over 40 community folks from across the country and across industry. So we had business leaders, we had activists, we had politicians reviewing the applications, and then we narrowed it down to a pool of 10, who then had to basically do the Shark Tank style, pitch their ideas to us. What came out of that was that we had 7 ideas, one that solved for the juvenile detention system that basically called Julie Through the System, where it gamified what would happen if you were actually incarcerated as a young person. First of all, hearing the pitch broke my heart because the picture that they had was a young Latino who could not have been more than 9 years old, handcuffed on the floor. But it provided folks with the option of, like, if you basically do get pulled over or something happens, you can actually call a professor that can vouch for you, and all of a sudden you can do community service instead of going to juvenile detention. But it gamified it. Another one was this young woman who found out at 19 years old, valedictorian of her class, that she didn't qualify for any FAFSA, federal aid, because she didn't have a social security number. She was undocumented. So she's creating the Dreamers Roadmap, where she's going to basically pull together all of the funding available to Dreamers. That impacts a couple million people. Julie Through the System, a couple million people. Another one realized that there's over 4.7 million Latino business owners, but their businesses only last roughly 18 months because they don't know how to scale their businesses. Latinos and immigrants are also the fastest purveyors of businesses in the country. They are all solving for problems that, because they are not at the table, but they're issues that the country actually needs to be solved. And that was, to me, was, if anything, one of the highlights of the work that I've done at Voto Latino, because we've actually been able to see the systems. I had a conversation yesterday, I was in Palo Alto, and I was having a conversation with a funder, and it was curious, because they said, well, you guys gave $100,000, that was the top prize, $100,000, but is it working? And in the back of my head is like, you guys you blow through $70 million and never ask, is it working? It's just like, we're giving folks the space and the opportunity to try. And we can't be afraid of failure.
That's right.
Because if we don't start actually asking the questions to solve problems, we'll always feel stuck. And this was an opportunity to give the community back the opportunity to solve for those big problems.
Well, exciting stuff. We have a similar experience with Yes We Code. We've done hackathons in Detroit and New Orleans and Philadelphia, and similar, having young, mostly African-American kids coming up with their own solutions, very similar stuff. One kid came up with an app he said, I need an app to alert me as to when my court dates are. And at first I was kind of appalled. I'm a father. I'm like, he said, well, hold on, I do the same stuff other kids do, but other kids in the suburbs, they do it in their dad's basement. If I do it on a street corner, I get arrested. That's not my problem. My problem is I get arrested and they give me something called a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And it says, you have to appear on this date, at this time, on this floor, in this department, and I lose a piece of paper. And by the time I figure out where I'm supposed to be, I'm in big trouble with that judge. As soon as I walk in, you're not compliant. You're out of here. He's like, can't there be an app for that? So they built it. If you ask me what's the one thing that we could do that would do the most good, we should just redesign whatever institution that we're in, public or private, to just stop wasting genius. So that would be my slogan. Stop wasting genius. We have absolute, stone cold, ridiculous levels of genius just left on the table because we're not connecting the industry that's built on genius, allegedly trying to scale genius, that somehow thinks with no actual effort or design, they have already captured all the genius. I think they design for everything. They test for everything. But somehow without any actual testing or effort, they've just magically captured all the actual people of merit. It just happened spontaneously. Nothing else happens in the world spontaneously. Everything else has to be measured, tested, planned for. But this happens spontaneously. So they've got all the geniuses already in Silicon Valley. They just happen to be a bunch of white guys. And literally in Northern California, Oakland, the most diverse city in the country, at least, by the numbers. If you're a Samoan kid, a Vietnamese kid, a Filipino kid, a black kid, a Guatemalan kid, sitting behind a public school desk in Oakland, California, you are 33 minutes away from the Facebook campus. And you will never get there. Doesn't matter if you are a born mathematical genius, because we haven't built the systems to get those folks there. So when the Trayvon, to give the story, which is a true story, by the way, when the Trayvon Martin thing went down, I happened to be at Paisley Park. Now, pause. I can tell how old you are simply by saying I was at Paisley Park. Paisley Park is Prince's house. That's the house. Prince is a rock star for you young people.
Do they still use the term rock star?
I don't even know. I don't even know.
Do they know what that means?
It's kind of like a web celeb, but they have music anyway. I don't know. So, and he's a brilliant, amazing guy, not just a musician, but a huge humanitarian. Because of his religious beliefs, he's not allowed to talk about his charitable work, but he's a tremendous, tremendous supporter of good causes. If you work for an organization, you probably have money from them and just don't know it because it's all done anonymously. He helped us a great deal in Oakland back when we were doing a lot of the green job stuff, teaching young people how to put up solar panels. Because I'm a dad, so I don't romanticize anything. I got a bunch of young people in my neighborhood in Oakland standing in front of my house, pissing me off. Like, I would rather you be on top of my house putting up some solar panels. We got to come up with something for you to do. So that was the entire origin of the Green Jobs movement in Black America. It's like, you cannot stand in front of my house another weekend. So Prince helped us with that, and then I was with him when the Trayvon Martin verdict came down, and I was pissed off. And everybody around was also angry, and he was upset, but he doesn't show it. And he made an observation, and his observation was very typical of him. He said, whenever you see a black kid wearing a hoodie, you think there goes a thug. But if you see a white kid wearing a hoodie, you think Mark Zuckerberg. It's not the hoodie. He said the hoodie is the uniform in Silicon Valley. Nobody's shooting anybody there. Nobody's beating anybody up there. He said, why is that, Van? I said, well, because of racism. He said, maybe. Or maybe we just haven't created enough black Mark Zuckerbergs. He said, maybe you're focused on the wrong stuff. And that was, very embarrassing to me. I'm the big civil rights guy. But we looked into it, and it turned out there are in the Native American, Latino, and black communities organizations that are trying to help young women and young men to get into this field, but they are small, undersupported, marginalized, tokenized, not scaled up, not given the real support that they need. So we built something called Yes We Code, basically just to try to help aggregate some of the good that's already happening and give it a little bit of lift. So Prince did a concert for us last July, 50,000 people in New Orleans to launch it. And we now are partnering with all the big names. And we just raised a couple $1 million in Oakland to build the first true talent pipeline to connect Oakland to Silicon Valley. We have 12 tech companies that have signed on, 5 boot camps. Let me just say this, and I know you got some more questions. I have to say this. I think that we don't understand the opportunity that's in front of us right now for communities that are struggling when it comes to technology and the stuff that she's talking about. Just on the worker side, forget equity, forget entrepreneurship, forget all this stuff that we know is a real game. Let's just play the little entry-level worker game, okay? The tech industry is going to be 1 million workers short in 8 years. 1 million workers short. I didn't say 1 million African American, Latino, Native American, female. I mean 1 million workers, period. They don't have enough white guys. Okay? So I love when there's a labor shortage. I love it. Anytime you don't have enough workers, I'm happy because I got a lot of people who need some work. So if we just did 10% of that million as women and men of color, that's 100,000 women and men of color who could be on the ground floor for an industry that's going like this.
Well, and Van, just to interrupt you and add a little bit, what folks don't realize is that we actually have record numbers of Latino and African Americans graduating from STEM, but only 1 out of every 4 actually get employed. And there is a retention problem because many of them don't even last. So we have to basically reimagine what a tech worker looks like. Yeah. And I think that's what you're getting at. Like, what does a tech worker look like so that when you walk through the door, folks are open to actually seeing a person of color being able to fill those positions. And let me tell you, Latin America doesn't have that problem, right? Mm-hmm. You go to areas in Africa, they don't have that problem. So it's definitely perception of what ability is.
And I think it's this pipeline issue, Van, that you alluded to. Because the issue, right, is, and if you look at the research, it's not even right that Latino and African American kids, for example, don't have STEM aspirations. It's really the pathways to those opportunities that are kind of critical. And I think research is suggesting, right, that just exposure to careers in STEM, exposure to people in STEM can really make a difference. So in terms of the work that you see yourselves doing, and the work I think that many people in this room are doing, I mean, how do we begin to really sort of build out that pipeline, which I think is so critical in terms of helping young people to sort of reimagine their own possible futures?
Well, I think one is creating the spaces. So it came to my attention after we did the VL Innovators that Voto Latino was the very first accelerator ever to give funding to a cohort of Latinos. This is 2015. And this was a contest as an idea. So now we are actually in conversations trying to see can we create a permanent accelerator program within Voto Latino. And I think one thing is that people at the end of the day, yes, you want to solve for social problems, but we also recognize that we have to make a business case. And so the more that we can actually attract talent so that there is actual return, I think that people will follow the money.
I agree with that 100%. I also think that if you're African American, you look at your kids playing, we still are doing silly stuff. I mean, maybe my kid's going to be able to get in the NBA. So you got 1 million African American kids every weekend playing basketball trying to get in the NBA. The problem is the NBA hires 15 kids a year. So you got 1 million black kids trying out for 15 jobs. If then we're not careful, you'll have 15 little black Urkels trying out for 1 million tech jobs. Well, that's not going to work.
Right.
You can't put maximum effort against minimum opportunity and win. And you can't put minimum effort against maximum opportunity and win. So part of it is just what you said. It's just the exposure, just recognizing, LeBron James is literally like, 1 in a billion. 1 in 5 people, I don't care if you're male, female, Smurf, it doesn't matter. 1 in 5, people have the basic ability to be a coder. The pattern recognition, the persistence, et cetera. It's much, much more likely
It's ingrained, yeah.
that you can get on the Mark Zuckerberg track than you can get on the LeBron James track or the Jay-Z track. And I tell people all the time, I'm going to be a rapper. I'm like, well, first of all, the record companies are getting eaten alive by technology folks. So how are you going to make any money? I said, don't show me your rap, show me your app. I'm clever. So I think that there is, on the one hand, we need to broaden the number of people who are exposed. Yes, We Code does a lot of that. We got partnerships with Essence Magazine, Time Inc., MSNBC, you guys, to broaden the top of the funnel. But we also have to have both employers and investors who are much more willing to think through their own biases. See, I think that the meritocracy problem is actually reversed. If you can't figure out how to tap genius, that 30 minutes from your damn building, I question the meritocracy of your organization. Don't tell me about my kids don't have merit. There's something wrong with your organization if you can't see the merit.
So we've got one more question, and then if you have questions, we also wanted to spend some time just kind of opening it up and allowing you to speak to both Ben and what he said. DML is populated by a lot of young leaders in education, technology, sort of civic and political life. And I'm wondering, just kind of based on your own experiences and the great work that you've been doing over the course of your career, what advice might you offer to those here and who may be watching online, who are aspiring to launch something locally, who really want to have impact? What resource do you think is really critical? What disposition? What advice would you give to someone who says, I want to make a difference. These issues are important to me. Where do I start? How do I start? What do I do? Kind of just based on your own sort of history and experience, what might you suggest to those young innovators who are here and around?
My suggestion is that, when we set out with Photo Latino, basically we just had assumptions. And those assumptions were that there was a massive amount of Latino youth that could help navigate America for their parents. We knew that the majority of them spoke English and they used technology. Now, give me some credit, this was 10 years ago when everybody thought that I was crazy and nuts and that wasn't happening. 10 years later, we're like, yes. So we had 3 basic assumptions that we were able to identify and support through market research, not in the academia, but in general market. And basically, corporations, we used all our findings from what corporations had basically done analysis. And I say this because we had 3 basic assumptions and a bit of an idea of what we wanted to do, but then we started tapping really, really smart people and surrounding ourselves with people that wanted to solve the like problem. And I think sometimes when you are thinking of an idea, you feel that you have to have all the solutions right away. And what you don't want, what you actually need is you have to have some clarity and vision, but then surround yourselves with the best of the best so that they can help move that agenda forward. And you want folks to evangelize for you, that they actually understand what the issue is, they see themselves invested in it, and they help solve the issue with you. I think sometimes you want to strike it out on your own, and that's a long, hard journey, and you're basically preparing yourself for failure. Coming from I always like to this is for my Latinas out there and my immigrant community, women out there. Oftentimes in immigrant communities, you want to solve for your issue by yourself. What happens in the home stays in the home, and you have to basically self-solve. You have to break away from that. One of my life journeys was how to start asking for help. And through that development, I think that we've been able to create an incredible partnership, not only with FAN, but with so many other entities and individuals, because we have an urgency of now. One of the things, if you were to tell me, one of our blind spots right now that's happening in America is that we keep thinking that immigration is the only issue that Latinos care about. We can't actually start solving for real issues until we get immigration past us, not because it's a Latino issue, but because it's an American issue, and because 1 out of 3 Americans, when asked about Latinos, 1 out of 3 believe that every Latino they see is undocumented. When in fact, close to 70% of all Latinos are US born, not including the rest of us like myself that are naturalized. When you open up the New York Times, I encourage you guys to question when someone said, I recently read this, it was a blaring headline in the New York Times, like race relations in the US are at an all-time low. I opened it up, and it was paper. I started reading, and I was blown away that it was a binary poll, African American and white. We can't solve for our country's problems until we ensure ourselves that we're actually including the second largest, fastest growing demographic of Americans in every single poll. I encourage you guys in the work that you're doing, because I know that you all want to solve big problems, whether at the local level or at the national level. We can't have those problems solved if we're not including this demographic. I spoke to a pollster shortly after who was affiliated with the New York Times, and I asked them why, and they said it's because 3 out of 10 Latinos don't speak English. I said 6 out of 10 of us do.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about an undocumented population, the likelihood that they're undocumented, maybe those are the individuals that don't speak English. You're just telling me that you're not trying hard enough. And we actually have to, in order to solve big problems, we actually have to make sure that they're included. And just one last note, when we're saying that there's a tidal wave of Latinos coming, we're not kidding. 40% of all Latinos are under the age of 20. The group of where they are right now is 14 years old. Individuals start identifying with political thought and identity between the ages of 14 and 24. They're ripe for this conversation. We just have to give them a chance and give them the space to talk about it.
Good. I should have gone first so you could end with that. Well, first of all, I would say, please don't try to change anything. Just don't. It's too hard. If you can possibly not be a change maker, do your parents a favor and tell them you are just going to go get a normal job and you will see them often and be happy. Now, if you can't even hear what I just said because it just sounds too nutty and you know you are going to do this, then I think the advice you just got is perfect. I think we spend a lot of time trying to beat people up and make them be change makers. I'd rather support the people who just can't help it, who just have to. If you don't have to, don't do it. I've seen a lot of people who don't really want to. They think they're supposed to. They go gobble up all the attention and the grant money and everything else and screw it up and quit. I'm too old to be polite. So I want to talk to people who just, if we beat you up and told you couldn't be a change maker, you'd say, well, just kill me because I have to. I can't stand it. I can't see a planet overcooking. I can't see kids starving. I can't see cops beating people. I can't see people being chased around in their own communities because they don't have the right birth certificate. I just can't stand it. I got to do something. If you're that kind of person, then you just got the best advice. You're going to have more bad days than good days. It's just the way it is. This stuff is tough. You're going to learn more about yourself than you're going to learn about anything else, mainly all your faults and flaws, because up against tough problems, you can't hide. So I've had the blessing of my life of having started 4 or 5 allegedly successful social enterprises, and I have all these awards and honors. They mean nothing to me because the problems are still there. So you are going to spend a lot of time trying to think your way around stuff. I think you need a few good, loyal people that you put through the paces. People will come up to you after a great speech and tell you how wonderful you are. They're not going to be there for you on a Saturday morning when you're trying to crank out that last grant proposal that you have to get, or you're laying people off in 2 weeks. They're not going to be there. So there's a whole level of sobriety that I think is important to let people know about right up front. And the payoff is, for me, unbelievable. I am a completely different human being than I was 20 years ago, when I could barely talk in public, was so painfully shy that it was, you know, I mean, I see videotapes of me trying to talk to my parents the week I graduated from law school, and, you know, my voice was shaking just talking to my parents. I am a completely different human being because I've been to too many funerals. I've seen too many black and brown kids in caskets with grown folks with white hair sitting up in the pews. It's supposed to be the reverse. I've seen too much stuff. So you wind up becoming something, and somebody told me this, everybody has a fate and everybody has a destiny. They're not the same. Fate is the stuff you can't do nothing about, no matter how hard you try. No matter how hard I try, I'm never going to be a beautiful 23-year-old Asian guy. It's not my fate. I've been working at it. It's not changing. So you gotta.
Now you may be able to. But
I mean, exactly. If Google can get that reversing aging thing going, I'm going to get the reversing aging, not the Asian, the aging. But you know, you've got a fate. You know, you're born into a certain body. You're born into a certain time. You know, there's certain things you can't do anything about, and a lot of people are defeated by that. But they forget you also have a destiny. And your destiny is not your fate. Your destiny is completely different. Your destiny is that call to greatness inside you anyhow. You know, an acorn has a destiny to be an oak tree. Doesn't mean every little acorn becomes an oak tree. Some of them get smushed on the sidewalk. Some get eaten by squirrels. But every single acorn has that call to greatness. And it's in you too. There is some call to greatness inside yourself. Now, you can answer it or not. Nobody's going to know what it was. Nobody can judge you for it. But if you keep feeling that call, and you keep looking at your notebook, and 7 years ago, you're writing the same thing I'm going to do, and you could have written it this morning, that's your call to greatness. And, you know, you already got the best advice for it, but in terms of the mindset, first of all, don't do it. If you can possibly help it, don't do it. But if you do it, find a couple of good friends. Know it's going to be harder than it's going to be easier. But keep checking back into that call to greatness, and eventually you wind up doing stuff you're proud of.
Great. Thank you. So we wanted to open it up. If you have any questions, remarks, observations, we'd love to get a little bit of interaction with our few minutes left between you and Ben and Maria Teresa. Do we have mics, or should people? We do have mics. So we have a hand right here. You stand up, please, sir. Maybe not.
So my question is, what role have Asian Americans played in both of your work? Because I feel like when we're talking about diversity and equity, it's an interesting place to be in, because half the time we're feeling really good about ourselves, and half the time we're feeling kind of guilty because we jump sides of the fence, depending on the issue we're talking about, based on whether we're doing well in that section of society or not. So I'm just curious, what role do Asian Americans play?
I'll let you go second, because I can. Most of my work has been with black folks and Asians. I actually haven't done as much work. I helped to start something called INS Watch back in the Mission District back in the 1990s. That was really the last time I had a big formal partnership until working with Voto Latino on that front. I mostly work with Asian folk, but Samoan, Vietnamese, you know, the ones who, Filipino, the ones who get screwed over a lot. And so I've got a lot of work on that end of it. I don't have as much work with the other communities.
And we work more formally with the larger, as you can say, larger Asian communities at the national level, specifically on voter registration, but specifically on voting rights. because it's disproportionately impacting the Asian community and the Latino community and immigration. And most folks don't realize that one of the biggest individual groups that are dinged when it comes to undocumented are young Koreans. Many of their parents got a special visa to come in and open up a dry cleaning store, and they were grandfathered in, but the moment that they turned 21, I think it's, 18 years old, they're no longer grandfathered in. So you have a generation of young Koreans that do not have access to the system. And so we work through immigration rights reforms, we oftentimes elevate those voices. If anything, anytime the White House asks us for a undocumented voice, 99% of the time we actually look for an Asian to basically open up and say, this is something that is not necessarily just a Latino issue, this is actually very multicultural. A couple of years back, there was a conversation between YouTube and the president, and it was right after the State of the Union, and we actually identified a young man by the name of Steve Lee. He had a crazy, wild immigration story. His parents were fleeing China via Peru, where he was born, and came to the United States. And so they wanted to deport his parents back to China and Steve to Peru. And he was raised in San Francisco. So that was one of the individuals that we highlighted.
Good morning. My name is V. Bravo, Education Director of the Tribeca Film Institute out of New York City. I too was undocumented for 10 years when I came here in 1980. So I'm one of the people that you mentioned. I now work in prisons, bringing filmmaking programs into places like Rikers Island, Otisville State Prison, and actually the prison that was featured in New York this past week where the two men escaped from. The question that I have for you both is, what are your thoughts on working and equipping the young men and women who are doing 2 to 3 year bids in our prisons who are coming back home? There's a lot of focus on preventative measures, right? Not to get black and brown folks into jail, but we have about, in New York City, about 40,000 young men and women that re-enter society after like a short bid. How are we using digital media to help them become the productive citizens that they need to be?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you raised it, and it gives me a chance to point out that this month there will be federal legislation, finally, we believe, bipartisan, comprehensive, gives you PTSD, bipartisan, comprehensive. The immigration bill is allegedly going to be bipartisan and comprehensive. But on the criminal justice side, we do have a bill that we believe will be introduced in the House with a very far right-wing Republican and a very far left-wing Democrat to begin to do something about the whole system, at least at the federal level. And when that happens, our campaign, Cut 50, Cut the Prison Population in Half, cut50.org, is going to need all your help. That bill, I say it's comprehensive because it tries to reduce the number of people and the amount of people who go in, but also tries to figure out what to do with folks when they come home. And this whole reentry crisis and second chances, now it's being called second chances, it's called reentry, is a massive thing. I think that if you look at the digital economy, young people of color do really well on 3 out of the 5 things that are necessary to succeed. There are 5 C's in the digital economy. There's creativity. Nobody doubts the creativity of young people of color in this country. There's communications. Nobody doubts the communications genius of young people of color in this country. There's connectivity. Young African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and other underrepresented minorities over-index on Twitter, over-index on Instagram. We're overly connected. So those 3 C's, creativity, connectivity, and communications, we dominate everybody. It's the cash and the coding where we fall down. We don't understand the finance and the business part, and we don't understand the technology part. And so other people then get all the value. Black Twitter, in case you haven't noticed, is not on the stock exchange, okay? Twitter's on stock exchange, making money. Black Twitter is just a bunch of us making money for other people. And so until we understand the cash and the coding part of it, we're going to be digital sharecroppers in the information economy, clicking around, making money for other people, and that's something that's got to change. And by the way, since I said so many bad things about Silicon Valley, I do want to point out that there has been real motion. I talked about Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, with Sheryl Sandberg, has a real initiative trying to do something about diversity. And they hired someone named Maxine Williams, who's a genius, who's really trying to do something. Intel has put $300 million on the table, plus an extra $1 billion on the table for diversity. So those of us who are trying to figure this stuff out, whether it's Intel, Facebook, Google, and others, Apple just put $40 million on the table. So there is some now actual commitment in dollars. What we need, though, are the people who can connect those institutions with those communities, probably a lot of you in this room.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Page. I'm a former teacher, having gone back to school in instructional technology and media, but also working in adult learning and leadership. Working, trying to shift education cultures, where I'm wondering what you guys think. I appreciate your stories very much today. I also grew up in NorCal, go Warriors, and saw Prince at First Avenue, so that dates me. And Giants, no-hitter. I was there in New York the other night. All right, so I think that informal learning and anytime, anyplace learning, the way that we're connected these days is possibly the solution to the divide that keeps growing. I think our schools are creating that divide. They're shooting themselves in the foot, you know, and I'm working with teachers, so I'm not overlooking that. But schools move at a glacial pace. They're not agile. The rich schools are. They have money to try things. But the public schools where I went in Oakland didn't. And so I was just, while you were talking, messing with some numbers. And I saw that 168 hours in a week, and school is about 40 hours. And if you give a kid 8 hours to sleep, that's 56 hours. So that leaves 72 hours for the rest of us to design opportunities like you guys are doing with organizations, or some of the designers can do with solutions, to allow kids to go beyond schools that are, I think, keeping them down, or at least the majority of children of color and children of struggling communities. So I'm just curious if you see that market as a positive, because the other C we're falling down on is confidence. If a kid doesn't have confidence, they can't dream or they can't problem solve. And so, yeah, just curious about your feeling about that space.
So I participated, I was the co-chair of the Aspen Institute on Connected Learning. And it was also underwritten by MacArthur. And MacArthur's thinking about it exactly how you're saying is, how do we reimagine education for the 21st century? Recognizing that the moment that a young person steps out of the classroom, there are opportunities to learn in local community organizations, there's opportunity to learn in the local library, there's local internships, reimagining how they are connected. And what MacArthur is trying to solve for, though, is how do we actually quantify and qualify that learning, so that we actually provide an incentive for the child to go into the library and all of a sudden I learned a new skill. Let's say I started to learn how to code at the library, so that you could actually have something on your transcript, so that employers all of a sudden basically a digital badge, which we Voto Latino experimented with last year through our leadership development. But this idea that this digital badge all of a sudden is saying, you know what, this individual actually received some sort of excellence of training, so that then they could actually be recognized outside of the classroom. Because I think you're right. I think that right now we are kind of stuck as a country. I think the reason that we're stuck as a country, by the way, is lack of will, too. I think that everything gets so overwhelming that we don't know where to start. And I think that if we get our druthers together and actually say, these are the areas where we're going to reimagine, learning being one of them, then it actually allows us to recognize not only the brilliance and genius that a young person has, but then an employer can actually adapt it and say, oh, I understand what you did as an intern here, or I understand what kind of course you took at the library. But we have to basically go beyond school in order to do that. And we have to understand, we also have to train our teachers with confidence to shepherd our kids into the 21st century. But I think oftentimes teachers are in the center of learning, but oftentimes maybe what they need is to get retrained so that they realize that they actually are the shepherds of technology and are the ones that are molding the kids on where they should be going, so that they're creating trusted spaces.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, what she said.
Hi, I'm Gabe Lyon from the Chicago Architecture Foundation. Go Hive Buzz. Yeah, woo! Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris Gutierrez, for having us. So a lot of conversation about race and a lot of clarity around race. And one of the things I'm wondering as you're speaking is, as the minorities become the majority, we probably need to start talking also about class and economics. And from your incredible perspective on America, are you seeing things that are helping shift the economic opportunity? Can you talk about some things outside of STEM, for example, where you're seeing coalitions or really interesting strategies that are helping move young people into things that they can do, they can earn money, and really shift the conversation? And one of the reasons I talk about STEM, even though I've been an activist in STEM for a long time, is there are a lot of ways where advantage accumulates quickly in STEM, but disadvantage accumulates even faster. So having some examples that you could talk about some of the economic opportunities, maybe where we're seeing poor kids get experiences that help them become not poor and their families not poor. Could you talk a little bit about that access and equity standpoint? Maybe some examples we could look to?
Well, there are not a lot of good ones, and proof of that is there's still a lot of poor people who are poor. So the part of the challenge that we have is that the pathways out of poverty that my father had access to. My dad was born desperately poor in segregation in Memphis, Tennessee. And by the way, a lot of times white people are like, why do you guys keep talking about race? Like that was 1,000 years ago. Just to be clear, I'm a 9th generation American. I'm the first person in my family that was born with all my rights. I was born in '68. My mother and my father were born under segregation. My mother and my father were married under segregation. So, you know, that's how recent it was. 9 generations, I'm the first one. My cousin Kenya was born in 1965 before the bills passed. So she actually wasn't born with all her rights. So just to be clear, you know, race and class for us are pretty mixed in. The problem is that to get out of poverty and stay out of poverty, you got to climb a ladder based on your own efforts. Nobody can just give you money and suddenly you're not poor. They give you money, you're not broke. But if you haven't been made strong in your skills and your understanding, you'll be broke again tomorrow. The challenge is that the rungs on the ladder are missing now. We tried to put some rungs in from the clean energy, green job side so that we could create jobs, people putting up solar panels, weatherizing homes, making organic farms. We have more green jobs than we've ever had, and they're growing, but not enough. The tech jobs are another possible source. But we're going to have to be much more aggressive as a country, both public and private, if we want to put people back to work. So I appreciate your intervention with regard to talking about class and economics. The black community, though, is in free fall. Not just underclass, so-called, you know, that gets a lot of attention. The black middle class is in free fall. African Americans culturally do not buy stocks and bonds. Check this now. Check this. African American celebrity gets a big contract, big opportunity, sells 1 million records. What do they say? I'm gonna buy my mama a house. See, you're all black. I'm gonna buy my mama a
Car.
Yeah. House, car, not stocks and bonds. That looks like gambling. Black middle class doesn't like gambling, so we never did that. So when the crash happened, we lost 70% of our wealth because we were targeted for subprime mortgages even when we qualified for better.
Right.
Stock market's back up 2 times. Housing market's still down.
Yep.
So the black middle class is suffering from a wealth point of view. The black working and so-called underclass suffering from a mass incarceration point of view. And there are not a lot of success stories yet. That's why we need you guys.
Right. Well, and I think to underscore that, so, and the same thing happened with the Latino community. Most of the Latino communities were first-time home buyers during the crash, and they, because of predatory lending, now they have screwy credit. So now they have terrible credit. So when are they going to be able to, again, buy a house? So one of the things, and this is, you know, just speaking out loud, is one of the things we actually have to look at is how do we reimagine credit scoring when we have a generation of not just African American and Latino, but a whole generation of young Americans across the board that are not going to be able to qualify for housing because they were part of the gamble of the banking industry that walked away with tons of cash. So that's one underscore. But I'd also say, I'd also argue that when you look at everything from the Tea Party, the Occupy Wall Street movement, when you look at even what Black Lives Matter, they're all symptomatic of the exact same thing in many respects. And that is increased inequality in this country, and folks are not sure how to voice it and how to move it into changing government. And I think that if we can get those, and I say the Tea Party is part of that, because I think the Tea Party is the grandparents and Occupy are the grandchildren. And they just don't know how to come together, basically saying, wait a second, I feel the oxygen coming out of my home, and grandparent, I can't even achieve your home, right? And then you have the Black Lives Matters, where you have an incredible movement of African Americans, Latinos, progressive whites, just saying, enough is enough, but it's symptomatic of something bigger that's happening in this country. And so how do we capitalize on those moments so that it becomes transformative and hopeful? And I think that's what we're trying to sort out here. So.
I see hands and others in line, but unfortunately, time says that we have to stop here. You have one more point.
Look, I need, Voto Latino deserves your help. I need your help. So.
We need your help.
No, I'm just joking.
Man.
I'm joking. They deserve it, need it. We need it, need it.
We need it. We're the smallest civil rights organization in this country.
And the best. But she says, now, she says they're the smallest civil rights.
Yeah.
She said there's the smallest civil rights organization for Latinos. They're one of the smallest civil rights organizations, period. You have to put Latino, and the best, period. Period, full stop. So please continue, if you aren't supporting them, support them. We have an organization that's new, that's why I said we need your help, because we don't have the track record. We just got the hopes.
But we have you, Van. You're amazing.
Okay. It's called the Dream Corps, kind of like the Marine Corps, but more fabulous, okay? The Dream Corps is a new organization that's consolidating a lot of the work we were describing. I just want to make sure, my staff would kill me if I didn't point out that we do have an organization. It supports Cut 50, this campaign to cut the prison population in half. It supports Yes We Code, this campaign to get 100,000 young adults of color coding. It also supports Green for All, which is a campaign to increase by 10 times the amount of solar in communities of color. Dream Corps, thedreamcorps.org online, and we need your help, so thank you.
Okay, so please welcome me, and join me rather, in thanking Maria Teresa and Van Jones for being here today.
Thanks, Van.
This is great and a wonderful way to kick off the next 3 days. I have one brief announcement, and then you're off to enjoy the DML2015 experience. This afternoon, there's a Ignite Talk happy hour that will be held here at 5:30, and I was told to say we will have beer. So, so please feel free to join us for the happy hour and just to continue the wonderful conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you.
Great way to